In the silence between stars, time moves differently. Not faster, not slower, simply differently. What feels like an eternity to those who walk upon worlds is merely the pause between one cosmic breath and the next. Civilizations rise and crumble in the space of that breath. Empires that span 1,000 systems become dust and memory, their greatest achievements reduced to debris fields that future species will mine for scrap metal, never knowing they harvest the corpses of gods.
The Quelvari had understood this once.
For 11,000 years, they had been the galaxy's eldest children, the inheritors, the keepers of the long peace, the civilization that other species measured themselves against and found themselves wanting. Their archives contained the death songs of 600 extinct races. Their astronomers had mapped the births and deaths of stars with precision that bordered on prophecy. Their philosophy taught that existence was a gift to be cultivated, that the younger species were saplings in need of gentle guidance, and that the Quelvari's purpose was to shepherd the galaxy toward an enlightenment that only they could comprehend. They had been so certain, so terribly, magnificently certain.
High Chronicler Valen Sur Korath had spent 400 years of her long life recording that certainty in the crystalline data matrices of the Great Archive. She had documented the rise of 17 new spacefaring species, cataloged their fumbling first steps into the void, and noted with academic precision which ones showed promise and which ones would destroy themselves before achieving true significance.
Now she stood on the observation deck of the Eternal Remembrance, watching her civilization burn. The ship trembled around her as another salvo of Devourer weapons struck the fleet's defensive screens. Through the viewport, she could see the broken remains of what had once been the 7th Armada, 200 vessels that had represented the pinnacle of Quelvari engineering, now reduced to spreading clouds of debris and frozen atmosphere. The bodies of her people tumbled through the void, their elegant forms made grotesque by decompression and cold. Valen's long fingers gripped the viewport's railing until her knuckles went pale. She was tall, even for a Quelvari, nearly 3 meters of slender grace wrapped in ceremonial robes that had once signified wisdom and now felt like funeral shrouds. Her skin was the color of deep twilight, shot through with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with her emotional state. Right now, those patterns flickered with fear and exhaustion. "High Chronicler," the voice came from behind her, weary and broken. "The Council requests your presence." Valen did not turn. "Tell the Council that I am watching our fleet die, Commander. I believe that takes priority over their deliberations." Commander Thrain Morvelith stepped up beside her. He had been one of the 7th Armada's most decorated officers before a Devourer weapon had vaporized his command ship and left him clinging to a piece of hull plating for 3 days before rescue. His left arm was a temporary prosthetic now, its movements jerky and imprecise. His eyes held the hollow look of someone who had watched thousands of his crew die in the space of minutes. "They're discussing the signal," he said quietly. Valen's bioluminescent patterns flickered. "Which signal? We've been broadcasting distress calls for 8 months. No one is coming." "Not our signals." Thrain hesitated. "An old one, from the Archive's records. A signal that was sent before." "Before what?" "Before we decided certain species were too dangerous to contact." Valen finally turned to face him. Her silver eyes, usually so controlled and diplomatic, now showed naked confusion. "What are you talking about?" 93 years ago, Thrain said, when the Devourer threat was first identified as a potential extinction-level concern, the Science Directorate authorized a broad-spectrum distress beacon. It was aimed at every system where we had detected signs of intelligent life, regardless of whether those species had achieved faster-than-light travel. The beacon was automated. It broadcast continuously for 7 years before the Directorate realized what they had done and terminated it.
Terminated it? Why?
Because some of the species on that list were problematic. Thrain's voice dropped. Species that showed concerning development patterns, aggressive tendencies, psychological profiles that suggested they would be destabilizing influences on the galactic order if they ever reached the stars. Valen felt something cold settle in her chest. "You're talking about quarantine species." "One in particular." Thrain looked away. The beacon reached a world in the outer spiral, a small, unremarkable planet orbiting a yellow star. The species there had barely achieved atmospheric flight when we first observed them. They were violent, tribal, and appeared to lack the psychological architecture for cooperative civilization on a large scale. "I know the world you mean." Valen's voice was barely a whisper. "Sol 3, the humans." "The signal reached them 93 years ago, High Chronicler. They received our distress call. And now," he paused, struggling with the words, "now they've answered." The observation deck fell silent, except for the distant thunder of weapons fire and the groaning of the ship's hull. Valen stared at Thrain, trying to process what he was telling her. The humans, the species that the Quelvari Science Directorate had classified as Category 7, too unpredictable, too aggressive, too dangerous for integration into the galactic community. The species they had chosen to ignore, hoping that isolation would either civilize them or destroy them before they could threaten anyone else. "That's impossible," she finally said. 93 years ago, the humans had no capacity for interstellar travel. They had no knowledge of faster-than-light physics. They were barely capable of reaching their own moon. "They were," Thrain agreed. "They aren't anymore." Another explosion rocked the ship. Through the viewport, Valen saw the Shield of Eternity, a dreadnought that had served the Quelvari Navy for 8 centuries, break apart under a concentrated Devourer assault. Its reactor went critical, and for a moment a small star bloomed in the darkness. "The Council believes we have no choice," Thrain said. "We've lost the outer colonies. We've lost the core worlds. The home world fell 6 months ago, you know this. What remains of our civilization is concentrated in this fleet, and this fleet is dying. If the humans are offering help, then we accept, regardless of the risk." Valen closed her eyes. The light from the dying Shield of Eternity played across her features like a funeral pyre. "Because there is no risk greater than extinction." "That's the Council's assessment, yes." "Where are the humans now?" Thrain's expression shifted, something that might have been awe or fear or both. "They're already here, High Chronicler. They arrived 3 hours ago. A single vessel holding position just beyond the engagement zone. They've been watching." The human ship was unremarkable. That was Valen's first thought as the shuttle approached it. The vessel was perhaps 300 meters long, a fraction of the size of even the smallest Quelvari cruiser. Its hull was angular and utilitarian, lacking the elegant curves and aesthetic refinement that characterized the technology of the elder species. There were no decorative elements, no visible symbols of rank or affiliation, no indication of the ship's purpose or capabilities. It was simply functional. Beside her in the shuttle, Commander Thrain shifted uncomfortably. They call it the Patience, he said. They refused to provide specifications or armament details, said it wasn't relevant to the current situation.
And the council accepted that?
The council is not in a position to make demands, High Chronicler.
Valen studied the human ship as they drew closer. Something about its design bothered her, though she couldn't quite articulate what. It was too simple, too unassuming. A species that had supposedly developed interstellar travel in less than a century should be showing off their achievement, not hiding it behind plain gray hull plating.
The shuttle bay doors opened before them, revealing a space that was as utilitarian as the ship's exterior. The lighting was soft and warm, the atmosphere thick enough to feel slightly heavy in Valen's lungs. She noted environmental adaptation on the fly. The humans had adjusted their ship to accommodate Quelvari physiology. That suggested either impressive technology or impressive forethought, possibly both.
A woman was waiting for them.
She was short by Quelvari standards, barely 2 meters tall, and her form was compact and dense in a way that suggested a world with higher gravity than Valen was accustomed to. Her skin was a warm brown, her hair cut close to her skull, and her eyes were dark and calm. She wore a simple gray uniform with no visible rank insignia.
High Chronicler Valen Seer Korath, the woman said. Her voice was quiet, her pronunciation of Quelvari phonemes perfect. I am Captain Adaora Okafor of the Earth Hegemony vessel Patience. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Valen inclined her head in the traditional gesture of respect between equals, a gesture she had not used for a species outside the Quelvari in over a century. Your assistance was unexpected, Captain, and, I confess, somewhat confusing. Our records indicated that humanity had not achieved faster-than-light capability. Something flickered in Captain Okafor's eyes. Not offense, not amusement, something more subtle, a recognition of the unspoken implications in Valen's words. Your records were accurate, she said, at the time they were made.
And since then?
Since then, things have changed. The captain gestured toward a corridor leading deeper into the ship. Please, we have much to discuss, and I suspect you have questions. Valen followed, with Commander Thrain close behind. The ship's interior was as plain as its exterior. Clean corridors, functional lighting, no art or decoration. But there was something about the way the spaces were organized, something about the subtle efficiency of every design choice that made Valen's chronicler instincts prickle with unease. She had spent 4 centuries studying the technology and culture of younger species. She knew what to look for. Immature civilizations built for display, for intimidation, for status. They built monuments and weapons that announced their power to the universe. This ship announced nothing. It simply was.
Your vessel is quite modest, Valen observed, given your stated purpose in coming here.
Captain Okafor glanced back over her shoulder. Is it?
You've come to offer aid against the Devourers. Presumably that means military assistance. Yet this ship appears to be a scout or survey vessel, not a warship. Appearances can be misleading, High Chronicler. The captain stopped at a door and pressed her palm against a sensor. This is our observation center. I thought you might want to see the current tactical situation before we discuss options. The door opened onto a room that made Valen's breath catch in her throat. It was not large, perhaps 15 meters across, but every surface was covered in holographic displays showing the ongoing battle in real time. Valen could see the eternal remembrance, her own ship, holding position at the center of the failing defensive formation. She could see the Devourers swarm, hundreds of biomechanical nightmares pouring through the gaps in the Quelvari lines. She could see the death toll climbing, moment by moment, as ships fell and lives ended. But that wasn't what made her breath catch. What made her breath catch was the detail, the precision. Every Quelvari vessel was tracked individually, its damage levels and crew status updated in real time. Every Devourer organism was cataloged by type, capability, and behavioral pattern. The display showed predicted attack vectors, optimal defensive positions, and casualty projections with a clarity that the Quelvari fleet's own tactical systems couldn't match.
"How are you doing this?" Thrain demanded, stepping forward. "You have one ship. We have sensor networks across this entire system, and we can't achieve this level of resolution."
"Different methods," Captain Okafor said simply. "Please sit. We have prepared refreshments appropriate to your species' physiology." There were chairs arranged around a central table, and on that table were cups containing a liquid that smelled faintly of the mineral springs of Valen's homeworld. A homeworld that no longer existed. A homeworld that was now a dead rock orbiting a star that the Devourers had left untouched as a monument to their victory. Valen sat slowly, her movements careful and controlled. She was beginning to realize that nothing about this encounter was accidental. Every detail had been chosen with purpose. "You've studied us," she said.
Yes.
"For how long?" Captain Okafor settled into her own chair across the table. "Since we received your signal. 93 years by your calendar, 87 by ours. And in that time, you went from atmospheric flight to interstellar travel."
Among other things.
Valen's patterns flickered with frustration. "Captain, I am a chronicler. I have spent my entire life studying the development of civilizations. What you're describing is impossible. No species achieves faster-than-light capability in less than a century. The theoretical physics alone requires—"
47 years, Captain Okafor interrupted quietly. "We cracked the theoretical physics in 47 years. Practical implementation took another 12. The remaining time was spent on other preparations."
"Other preparations?" The captain didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached out and touched a control on the table. The holographic display shifted, zooming out from the immediate battle to show a wider view of the system, then wider still, then wider. Valen watched as the scale expanded, system by system, sector by sector, until the display showed a map of the entire galactic arm. And scattered across that map, in positions that seemed almost random until you noticed the pattern, were points of light that hadn't been there before.
"What am I looking at?" she asked.
"Earth hegemony positions," Captain Okafor said. "Fleet staging areas, forward operating bases, sensor networks, and logistics chains, established over the past 40 years. Valen stared at the display. The lights numbered in the thousands. They formed a web that stretched from the outer spiral almost to the galactic core. "That's not possible," she whispered. "You keep using that word." Captain Okafor's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "I don't think it means what you think it means." Commander Thrain leaned forward, his prosthetic arm whirring. "Those positions, some of them are inside Devourer territory, inside their core regions. How are you maintaining assets there without being detected?" "Who said we weren't detected?" The captain's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her voice. "The Devourers have encountered humanity before, Commander. Several times, in fact. Those encounters did not go well for them." Valen felt the cold in her chest spreading. "You fought the Devourers? When?" We've been tracking the Devourer expansion for 1,200 years. We've never seen any evidence of...
You've been tracking the expansion you could see. Captain Okafor leaned back in her chair. The expansion that was moving toward your territory. But the Devourers expand in all directions, High Chronicler. While you were watching them approach your borders, we were watching them approach ours. And while you were building defensive lines and evacuation plans, we were building something else. The display changed again. This time it showed a single Devourer hive cluster, one of the massive biological complexes that served as the species' command centers. Valen recognized the type, a third-stage cluster, capable of coordinating campaigns across multiple systems. The Quelvari had lost 6 fleets trying to destroy one of these.
The image was a recording. A timestamp in the corner showed a date 3 years ago. The cluster hung in space, vast and terrible, its organic spires pulsing with the dark light of alien technologies. Around it orbited hundreds of Devourer warforms, living ships that ranged in size from fighters to battleships. Then the recording shuddered, and the cluster began to die. It didn't explode, it didn't fragment, it simply stopped. The pulsing light faded. The organic spires went still. The warforms orbiting it went dark and began to drift, their movements becoming random and uncoordinated.
What happened? Thrain demanded. What weapon did that?
The cluster was alive, Captain Okafor said. All Devourer structures are alive, connected by a form of biological quantum entanglement. They don't use traditional command structures because they don't need to. Every unit, from the smallest warrior to the largest hive cluster, is part of a single distributed consciousness.
We know this, Valen said. It's why they're so difficult to defeat. Destroying a few units accomplishes nothing. The consciousness simply routes around the damage.
Exactly. The captain nodded. So we didn't try to destroy units. We attacked the consciousness itself. That recording shows the first successful test of what we call a severance weapon. It introduces a form of neural static into the Devourer network, a signal that causes their biological entanglement to collapse in a cascading failure. Everything connected to the affected network becomes disconnected.
You killed them by cutting them off from each other, Thrain said slowly. You made them alone.
Yes. Captain Okafor's voice was soft. We discovered that the Devourers can't handle being alone. They've never experienced individual consciousness. When the network collapses, so do they. Valen sat in silence, processing what she was hearing. For 1,200 years, the Quelvari had fought the Devourers with conventional weapons, ships and soldiers and defensive lines. They had never thought to attack the network itself because they had assumed it was invulnerable, a fundamental feature of Devourer biology that couldn't be disrupted. And yet these humans, these primitives who had been building steam engines when the Quelvari were charting galaxies, had found a way. Why? She asked finally. Why develop this weapon? Why spend decades building a military infrastructure across the galaxy? You could have stayed in your corner of the spiral, hidden, safe. The Devourers were moving toward us, not toward you. We would have absorbed their attention for centuries before they became your problem. Captain Okafor was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had changed, become something older, something weighted with experience. High Chronicler, do you know why humanity was classified as a Category 7 species? Because you were violent, aggressive. Your psychology showed patterns of conflict and self-destruction that suggested you would be a threat to galactic stability. That's what you believed. The captain's eyes met Valen's. But that's not the whole truth. The whole truth is that we survived.
Valen frowned. Survived what?
Everything. Captain Okafor stood and walked to the holographic display, her back to them. When your observation drones first found us, we were recovering from a global war that had killed 100 million people. Before that, we had survived a pandemic that killed a third of our population. Before that, countless other wars, famines, disasters, extinctions. Our planet is not a gentle world, High Chronicler. It has tried to kill us many times, and we have always survived. She turned to face them. When we received your distress signal 93 years ago, we didn't know what it was. It took us years just to decode the basic language. But we recognized one thing immediately: fear. Your signal was a cry for help from a dying civilization, and we had heard cries like that before. We had made cries like that before.
So you came to help, Valen said. Out of compassion? Partly. The captain's expression was unreadable. But also because we knew something your science directorate never understood. Isolation doesn't protect you. Hiding doesn't save you. The only way to survive is to face the threat together. All of us. Every species, every civilization, every world that believes it has the right to exist.
You couldn't have known the Devourers would be this dangerous. When you received our signal, they were still a minor concern, a threat to a few outer colonies, nothing more.
We didn't know the specifics, Captain Okafor agreed, but we knew the pattern. A powerful empire, complacent in its strength, facing a new threat it doesn't understand. Allies who should be standing together, instead retreating behind their own borders. The strong abandoning the weak because they believe they can survive alone. She shook her head. We've seen that story before, High Chronicler. We've lived it. We know how it ends. Another explosion shook the ship, this one closer than the others. The tactical display flickered, and Valen saw that the Devourer swarm had breached the third defensive perimeter. They were 20 minutes from overrunning the Eternal Remembrance. Captain, Commander Thrain said urgently, our fleet is dying out there. If you have the capability to help, now would be the time.
Captain Okafor looked at him steadily. I need to ask you something first, Commander. Both of you. Ask quickly. Why did your people leave us alone? The true reason, not the official classification.
Valen felt her patterns flicker with something that might have been shame. Because we feared you. Your capacity for violence, your unpredictability, they reminded us of ourselves, of what the Quelvari were before we learned to control our baser impulses. We saw in you a reflection of our own darkest history, and we chose to look away.
And now?
Now we are dying, Captain, and we have no choice but to accept whatever help is offered, regardless of the source.
Captain Okafor nodded slowly. That's honest. I appreciate honesty. She touched the control on her wrist. All stations, this is Okafor. Begin Phase 1. The holographic display changed again. This time, it showed space around them, not the tactical representation, but a direct visual feed from the patient's external sensors. At first, Valen saw nothing unusual. The stars hung steady in the void, pinpricks of light against infinite darkness. The Devourer's swarm was visible as a distant mass of organic shapes, backlit by the fires of dying Quelvari ships. Then, the stars began to move. No, not the stars. Things that had been hidden among the stars. Things that were now revealing themselves, emerging from concealment so complete that even the Quelvari's advanced sensors had detected nothing. Ships.
Human ships, not one or two, but hundreds, thousands. They materialized from nothing, their hulls shedding whatever stealth technology had hidden them, and Valen felt her throat constrict as she realized the scale of what she was seeing. The ships ranged from vessels the size of the Patience to behemoths that dwarfed the largest Quelvari dreadnoughts. They formed a wall across space, their formations so precise that they might have been a single organism rather than a fleet, and they were all moving, slowly and inexorably, toward the Devourer swarm. "How?" Thrain's voice cracked. "How can there be this many? You've only been a spacefaring species for a few decades." 43 years since our first FTL test flight, Captain Okafor said. 43 years of building, planning, and waiting. We are not a large species, Commander. We do not reproduce quickly, but we do work very, very hard. The resources alone, the materials, the energy. We have been preparing for a war since the day we received your signal. The captain's voice was calm, almost peaceful. Not this specific war, but a war. We knew that someday something would come for us. Something we couldn't negotiate with, couldn't hide from, couldn't outrun. So we built, we stockpiled, we trained, and when the time came, we were ready. On the display, the human fleet reached the edge of the engagement zone. The Devourers had noticed them now. Valen could see the swarm's movement patterns shifting, individual warforms breaking away from the assault on the Quelvari fleet to investigate the new threat. "You should secure yourselves," Captain Okafor said. "The next few minutes may be somewhat intense." The human fleet opened fire. It wasn't like any weapons fire Valen had ever seen. There was no visible beam, no torpedo, no projectile. Instead, there was simply a ripple in space, a distortion that spread from the leading edge of the human formation and washed over the Devourer's swarm like a wave. And where that wave passed, the Devourers died. The effect was exactly what Captain Okafor had described. The warforms went dark. Their movements became random, uncoordinated, purposeless. Some continued on their last programmed trajectories, drifting past human ships that ignored them completely. Others simply stopped, hanging motionless in the void like corpses. In 30 seconds, half the Devourer's swarm was neutralized. "That's the severance effect," Thrain said, his voice awed. "But on this scale?" "We've had time to improve the technology," Captain Okafor said. "The initial test required direct contact with the target. Now we can project it across several light seconds. In another decade, we expect to achieve system-wide coverage from a single emitter." The human fleet advanced through the paralyzed swarm, picking off the remaining active warforms with surgical precision. Valen watched as weapons platforms that her people had struggled for centuries to damage were destroyed in seconds by concentrated fire from multiple human vessels. "Captain," she said slowly, "if you have this capability, why did you wait? Why let the Devourers destroy so much before you intervened?" Captain Okafor was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was heavy. "Because we needed to understand the threat. We needed to know the full scope of their capabilities before we revealed ourselves. And—" she paused. "And we needed the galaxy to understand what was at stake." "You let billions die to make a point?" "No." The captain turned to face her. "We let billions die because we couldn't save them. We weren't ready. The fleet you see now, it took 40 years to build. 40 years of every resource our civilization could spare, every hour of labor we could contribute, every sacrifice we could make.
We could have intervened earlier with less force, and we would have failed. The Devourers would have adapted to our weapons before we could refine them. They would have learned our patterns, countered our strategies, and eventually overrun us along with everyone else.
So you waited until you were strong enough to win.
We waited until we were strong enough to end it. Not just this battle, not just this campaign, the entire war. The Devourer species as a threat to the galaxy. Captain Okafor's eyes were hard. Do you understand, High Chronicler? We are not here to push them back. We are not here to negotiate a truce or establish a defensive line. We are here to destroy them, completely, permanently, so that no one ever has to face what your people faced again.
The holographic display updated. The human fleet had cleared the immediate area around the Quelvari formation and was now advancing deeper into the system, toward the Devourer staging areas that Valen's tactical officers had identified as secondary targets, targets that her fleet couldn't hope to reach.
The Devourers have hive clusters throughout this sector, Thrain said. Millions of warforms, even with your severance weapons.
We know. Captain Okafor touched her wrist control again. Phase 2.
The display zoomed out, further still, until it showed not just this system, but a map of the entire galactic arm. And then the lights appeared. Not hundreds, not thousands, millions. Millions of points of light blooming across the map in a coordinated pattern that covered every known Devourer position, every hive cluster, every staging area, every occupied world. Simultaneous attacks, Valen breathed, across the entire arm. How?
Coordination isn't difficult when you've had decades to prepare. Captain Okafor's voice was quiet. Every fleet has its orders. Every ship knows its role. Every weapon is synchronized to fire at the same moment across light years of space. The Devourers have never faced an enemy that could strike everywhere at once. They've always been able to concentrate their forces, overwhelm local opposition, then move on. That strategy doesn't work when there is no local opposition. When every attack is the main attack.
Valen stared at the display, watching as the lights spread, as the Devourer positions went dark one by one. She was witnessing the destruction of an existential threat, a threat that had haunted the galaxy for 1,200 years in a matter of hours.
"This is impossible," she said, and for the first time the word felt inadequate. No species could do this. The resources, the coordination, the technology.
"We're not like other species," Captain Okafor smiled, and there was something sad in her expression. "Your science directorate was right about that, at least. We are violent. We are aggressive. Our history is written in blood and fire, in wars fought over things that seem incomprehensible to peaceful civilizations. We have killed each other over resources, over ideology, over pride. We have built weapons capable of destroying our own world multiple times over." "Then how?" "Because we also learned." The captain's voice softened. "Every war taught us something. Every disaster, every plague, every extinction we survived, we took the lessons and we grew. We learned to cooperate across borders, across languages, across cultures that had hated each other for centuries. We learned to set aside our differences when something bigger threatened us all. We learned that the same aggression that made us kill each other could also make us fight for each other."
She turned back to the display, watching the human fleet advance.
"When we received your signal, we didn't know who you were. We didn't know if you were friends or enemies. We didn't know if helping you would save us or doom us. But we knew one thing.
Someone, somewhere, was afraid and alone and asking for help. And we had spent our entire history learning what happens when that call goes unanswered.
So you answered, Valen said.
We answered. Captain Okafor nodded. And we built an answer so large, so overwhelming, so final, that it could never be ignored again.
The next hours passed in a blur of tactical updates and growing wonder. Valen watched as the human fleets systematically dismantled the Devourer presence across the galactic arm. She watched as hive clusters that had resisted Quelvari attacks for centuries fell in minutes under the severance weapons. She watched as occupied worlds were liberated, their populations emerging from hiding to find the sky empty of the nightmares that had haunted them.
She watched, and she tried to understand how this was possible.
"Your population," she asked Captain Okafor during a brief lull. "How many humans are there?"
Approximately 12 billion, spread across our core systems and colonies.
12 billion, Valen shook her head. The Quelvari had 400 billion before the war. We had 1,000 worlds, industrial capacity that dwarfed anything in the galactic arm, and we couldn't stop the Devourers. Numbers aren't everything. The captain was reviewing fleet reports on a side display. Your civilization was built for peace. Your industries produced art, culture, knowledge, beautiful things, important things. But when the war came, you had to retool everything, and you didn't have time.
And yours?
Our civilization was built for survival. Captain Okafor's voice was matter-of-fact. We never stopped preparing for war, even during our most peaceful periods. We built redundancy into every system, trained reserves in every profession, stockpiled resources in ways that seemed paranoid until they suddenly became essential. She glanced at Valen. Your people looked at us and saw violence, but what they should have seen was fear.
We are a species that lives with the constant expectation of disaster, and we prepare accordingly.
That sounds exhausting.
It is, the captain smiled wearily. We don't recommend it, but it does have its advantages.
A chime sounded from the tactical display. Captain Okafor turned to look, and her expression shifted. "The prime cluster," she said. "We've reached it." Valen stood and moved to the display. The prime cluster was the heart of the Devourer civilization, if such a thing could be called a civilization. It was the largest concentration of Devourer biomass ever recorded, a structure so vast that it registered on astronomical surveys as a natural phenomenon. The Quelvari had calculated that destroying it would require more firepower than their entire civilization could generate in a decade.
The human fleet surrounded it now, hundreds of thousands of vessels forming a sphere that enclosed the structure completely.
"This is it," Captain Okafor said quietly. "The final step." "The severance weapon won't work at this scale," Thrain said. He had been reviewing technical specifications for the past hour, trying to understand the human technology. "The quantum coherence of the network is strongest at the prime cluster. Disrupting it would require more power than a single emitter can generate," the captain agreed. "That's why we're not using a single emitter." On the display, every human ship began to glow, their hulls lit up with energy patterns that Valen didn't recognize, channeling power from their reactors into synchronized transmission arrays. The effect was beautiful and terrifying, a constellation of artificial stars forming around the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known.
Every ship in this fleet is linked, Captain Okafor said. Every reactor, every emitter, every system, all working together as a single weapon. This is what 40 years of preparation looks like, High Chronicler. This is what a species forged in fire can accomplish when it sets aside everything else and focuses on a single goal.
The destruction of your enemies?
No. The captain's voice was firm. The protection of everyone else.
The fleet fired.
The severance effect that washed over the prime cluster was unlike anything that had come before. It wasn't a wave or a pulse. It was a storm, a reality-altering cascade that tore through the Devourer network like a hurricane through a forest. Valen watched as the greatest concentration of hostile biomass in the galaxy went still, went silent, went dark.
The Devourers died in moments. Billions of years of evolution, millions of captured systems, countless absorbed civilizations. All of it ended in a flash of engineered silence.
Valen's patterns pulsed with colors she couldn't name. She had spent her life recording history, and she had just witnessed the end of an epic.
"It's over," she whispered. "After all this time, it's actually over."
Not quite. Captain Okafor touched her wrist control. There are still remnant forces, isolated pockets that weren't connected to the main network. It will take months to hunt them all down. But the threat, the existential threat that has driven your people to extinction's edge, yes, that's over.
Why? Valen asked suddenly. I keep asking this question, and I don't think you've really answered it. Why did you do this? You could have protected your own borders, let the rest of the galaxy burn. We gave you no reason to care about us. We dismissed you. We quarantined you. We pretended you didn't exist because we were afraid of what you might become.
Captain Okafor was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful.
There's a concept in human philosophy, she said. We call it the lighthouse keeper's paradox. A lighthouse keeper sits alone on a rock in the middle of a storm-tossed sea. Every night they light their beacon to warn ships away from the rocks. They will never meet the sailors they save. They will never receive thanks or recognition. They simply do their job because someone has to, because the alternative is to let strangers die in the dark.
And you see yourselves as lighthouse keepers.
We see ourselves as people who remember what it's like to be the ship in the storm. The captain met Valen's eyes. Every species in this galaxy is alone in ways they don't fully understand. You think you're part of a community, part of a grand tapestry of civilizations, but the truth is that when disaster comes, you're on your own. You proved that when you left us to develop in isolation. The other species proved it when they refused to answer your distress calls.
Everyone assumes someone else will solve the problem. She paused. Humans learned long ago that the only way to change that pattern is to be the one who answers the call, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, even when the people calling are the same ones who abandoned you. Valen felt something shift in her chest, something that might have been shame or gratitude or both.
We were wrong about you, she said quietly. Our science directorate, our observation protocols, our assumptions about what constitutes a healthy civilization, all of it was wrong.
Maybe not wrong, Captain Okafor said. Maybe just incomplete. You saw our violence and assumed it was all we were. You didn't see what we do with that violence when it's pointed at something that deserves to die. And now?
Now you'll have to decide what happens next. The captain stood and stretched, her joints popping. The Devourer threat is ended. The galaxy is going to need to rebuild, restructure, reimagine itself. That process will take centuries, and the questions at the heart of it will be the same questions that have haunted every civilization since the first intelligence looked up at the stars and wondered if it was alone.
What questions? Who do we want to be? What do we owe each other? How do we build something worth preserving? Captain Okafor smiled. Humanity has been asking those questions since we first invented fire. We still don't have good answers, but we keep trying. The formal ceremony took place 3 days later aboard the Eternal Remembrance.
The ship had been repaired. Human engineering teams had worked around the clock, using technologies that made Quelvari engineers weep with envy. The damage from the Devourer assault had been erased so completely that it might never have happened. The ship gleamed like it was newly commissioned, a symbol of survival and renewal.
High Chronicler Valen stood at the center of the Grand Archive Chamber, surrounded by the remnants of her civilization. 12,000 Quelvari, all that remained of a population that had once numbered in the hundreds of billions. They filled the chamber to capacity, their bioluminescent patterns flickering with emotions too complex to name. Captain Okafor stood beside her, along with a delegation of human officers and diplomats. They seemed uncomfortable with the attention, standing stiffly in their plain gray uniforms, looking out of place among the elegant robes and ceremonial regalia of the Quelvari. "We have gathered here to mark the end of an age," Valen said, her voice carrying through the chamber's acoustics. "For 1,200 years, the Devourer threat has defined our existence. It has taken our worlds, our people, our hope. It has reduced us from the galaxy's eldest children to refugees huddled in a dying fleet, waiting for extinction." She paused, feeling the weight of what she was about to say. "That age is over. And it ended not through our own strength, but through the intervention of a species we dismissed as primitive. A species we quarantined because we feared what they might become. A species that, despite our failures and our arrogance, heard our call for help and answered." She turned to face Captain Okafor. "On behalf of the Quelvari people, I offer our deepest gratitude to humanity and the Earth hegemony. You owe us nothing, and yet you gave us everything. You came when no one else would. You fought when no one else could. You saved us, not because we deserved it, but because you believed it was right." Captain Okafor stepped forward. Her expression was serious, but there was warmth in her eyes. "High Chronicler, we didn't come here looking for gratitude. We came here because we believe that the galaxy is better when its civilizations work together than when they stand alone. We believe that the differences between species, the things that make each of us unique, are strengths, not weaknesses. And we believe that every thinking being deserves the chance to reach for something greater than survival." She looked out at the gathered Quelvari, her gaze steady. "Your people have 11,000 years of history, 11,000 years of art, philosophy, science, wisdom. You have learned things that humanity might never discover on our own. And now, with the threat ended, you have the opportunity to share that knowledge, to teach us what you've learned, and to learn from us in turn." "You would want that?" Valen asked. "Even after how we treated you?" "Especially after." Captain Okafor smiled. "Humanity has never been good at holding grudges. We prefer to focus on what comes next." The ceremony continued. Formal exchanges of diplomatic protocols, the establishment of provisional treaties, the beginning of a process that would take decades to complete. But through it all, Valen found herself watching the human delegation, trying to understand the species that had turned the galaxy on its head.
They were not what she had expected. The violence that had terrified her ancestors was still there, visible in the efficiency of their military, in the cold determination of their strategic planning. But there was something else, too. A warmth, a compassion, an almost fierce optimism that seemed to glow beneath the surface.
Later, after the ceremony had ended and the delegations had dispersed, Valen found Captain Okafor standing alone on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. "I have a question," Valen said, joining her. "One that has been troubling me since we first spoke." "Ask." "When you received our distress signal 93 years ago, how did you know we were worth saving? How did you know we weren't just another predator like the Devourers? How did you know that helping us wasn't a mistake?"
Captain Okafor was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft.
"We didn't," she said. "We hoped. We believed. But we didn't know. And yet you still came." "That's the point, High Chronicler." The captain turned to face her. "If you only help people when you're certain they deserve it, you'll never help anyone. The universe doesn't give us certainty. It gives us choices. And we chose to believe that somewhere out there, someone was worth saving."
And if you had been wrong? If we had turned on you, attacked you, proven ourselves to be exactly what your ancestors feared? Then we would have dealt with that too. Captain Okafor's smile was sad. Humanity has had a lot of practice dealing with disappointing outcomes, but we've also learned that the risk of being wrong is usually smaller than the risk of doing nothing.
Valen looked out at the stars, the same stars she had watched for 4 centuries, chronicling the births and deaths of civilizations. They seemed different now, smaller somehow, more welcoming. "Your species is very strange," she said finally. "We know," Captain Okafor laughed. "It's one of our more endearing qualities."
I meant it as a compliment.
I know, that's why I'm laughing.
They stood together in silence, watching the stars, as the first starships of the new alliance began their work of rebuilding the galaxy.
1 year later, Valen stood on the surface of her homeworld.
It had taken human terraforming teams 3 months to make the atmosphere breathable again. The Devourers had left the world a lifeless husk, its oceans boiled away, its forests burned to ash, its cities reduced to rubble. But life was returning. Quilvari seedlings were sprouting in engineered soil. The air smelled of growth and possibility. A human shuttle touched down nearby, and Captain Okafor, Admiral Okafor now, though she still seemed uncomfortable with the title, descended the ramp. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. "I wanted to show you something." Valen led her to a rise, overlooking what had once been the capital city. The ruins were being cleared away, replaced by the foundations of new structures. "We're rebuilding the Great Archive. It will take decades to complete, but when it's done, it will contain the complete history of every species in the galaxy."
Including humanity?
"Especially humanity." Valen smiled, a gesture she had learned from her human colleagues. "The chroniclers have been debating how to record your species' role in recent events. There are disagreements."
Disagreements?
Some believe you should be presented as saviors, beings of transcendent virtue who rescued the galaxy from darkness. Others argue for a more nuanced approach, acknowledging both your strengths and your complexities.
I vote for nuanced, Admiral Okafor said dryly. Nobody likes a savior who doesn't have flaws.
That was my position as well. Valen looked out over the rebuilding city.
But I also argued for something else, something that I believe captures the truth of who you are.
What's that?
Hope. Valen's voice was quiet. Your species embodies hope in its purest form. Not the naive hope of children who don't know what they face, but the hard-won hope of survivors who have seen the worst and still believe things can get better. You came to us not because you knew we deserved saving, but because you believed in the possibility that we might.
That's a very kind interpretation.
It's an accurate interpretation. Valen turned to face her. When your people received our distress signal, they didn't see an elder civilization in trouble. They saw strangers, unknowns, potential threats, and yet they still answered. They spent decades preparing, building, sacrificing for the chance to help someone they had never met.
We had our own reasons, Admiral Okafor said. Self-preservation among them.
Yes, but that doesn't change what you did. You could have protected yourselves and let everyone else burn. You could have waited until the devourers came to your borders and then fought alone. Instead, you chose to stand with us. All of us, even the species that had rejected you.
Admiral Okafor was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful.
There's a phrase in human history, she said, from a very old book written during one of our darker periods. No man is an island. It means that none of us are truly alone. Our fates are connected, whether we like it or not. What happens to one of us affects all of us.
Your people learned that lesson the hard way.
We learned it over and over again, across thousands of years of history. Every time we forgot, the universe reminded us. Admiral Okafor looked out at the rebuilding city. The Devourers were a threat to everyone. If we had let them destroy you, they would have come for us eventually. If we had let them weaken the other civilizations, we would have faced them alone. The only path to survival was cooperation, not because it was noble, but because it was necessary.
And yet, cooperation is noble, Valen said. Whatever the motivation, the result is the same. You saved us. You saved all of us. And now you're helping us rebuild, not as conquerors, but as partners.
That's the plan, Admiral Okafor smiled. Though I should warn you, partnership with humanity can be intense. We have strong opinions about everything. We argue constantly. We get emotionally invested in things that don't seem important and ignore things that seem critical. We're frustrating and exhausting and occasionally infuriating.
I've noticed. And you still want to work with us?
Valen considered the question. She thought about the past year, the chaos and confusion and unexpected joys of building something new with a species so different from her own. She thought about the human engineers who worked 18-hour days to repair Quelvari's ships, the human doctors who treated wounds they had never seen before, the human soldiers who stood guard over refugee convoys without expecting anything in return. She thought about the message that had started it all, a distress signal sent into the void, expecting no answer.
Yes, she said finally, I want to work with you. I want to learn from you. I want to understand how a species that has known so much violence can also know so much compassion.
It's not a contradiction, Admiral Okafor said quietly. The violence and the compassion come from the same place. We care so much about the things we love that we're willing to destroy anything that threatens them. We've just learned, over time, to expand the definition of things we love to include more than ourselves.
And now it includes the galaxy.
Now it includes everyone who asks for help. The Admiral's eyes were bright. Everyone who sends out a signal into the darkness, hoping someone will hear. Everyone who refuses to give up, even when all hope seems lost. Those are our people now. All of them.
Velen felt her patterns pulse with something that might have been joy, or gratitude, or hope. She had spent 4 centuries recording the deaths of civilizations. Now, for the first time, she was recording a birth.
The archive will need a new section, she said, a section devoted to the age that begins today. I have been considering what to call it.
What did you decide?
Valen looked up at the sky, at the stars that had once seemed so vast and indifferent, now filled with the lights of rebuilding fleets and hopeful futures. The age of answered calls, she said, because that is what humanity taught us, that no call for help should go unanswered, that no species should face the darkness alone, that the galaxy is only as strong as its willingness to stand together.
Admiral Okafor nodded slowly. I like it.
I thought you might. They stood together on the surface of the healing world, watching the stars emerge in the twilight sky. Somewhere out there, human ships were still hunting the last remnants of the Devourer threat. Somewhere out there, displaced populations were returning to worlds they had thought lost forever. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was learning a new way of being.
And it had all started with a signal, a lost SOS, sent in desperation, reaching a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. The galaxy had regretted many things in its long history. Wars fought for foolish reasons, civilizations lost to petty jealousies, opportunities squandered by fear and prejudice. But the day that signal reached Earth, the Devourers regretted it. The species who had dismissed humanity regretted it. The forces of destruction that had thought themselves invincible regretted it. Because on that day, across the vast and uncaring void, something heard, something answered, and something rose from a small, violent, beautiful world. Rose with fire and fury and an unshakable conviction that no one should ever have to face the dark alone. They called themselves humanity. And the galaxy would never be the same. The stars don't remember the Devourers. In the grand cosmic timescale, their existence was a brief flicker, a shadow that passed and was forgotten. But the stars remember the lights of human ships spreading across the galaxy, answering every call, standing guard against the darkness. And in the archives of 100 civilizations, in languages living and dead, one truth is recorded and preserved. A lost SOS reached Earth, and the galaxy was saved because of it.